So yeah, at this point, we'll just kind of go informal for like the next 2 hours, right? Whatever you all really want to talk about. So speakers, you are welcome to join us. You can come out of hiding, unmute, unface mute, which is my new favorite term from Becca.
True statement. True statement.
Face muting.
I heard about brief brain today, which is when you give so many briefings, your brain turns to mush. And I was like, how have I never heard of this before?
Brief brain. I have that a lot. How about Zoom brain? Yeah, that's a thing.
I'm going to be a little crass and say I Zoom butt is worse. So when you're sitting all day, you just don't want to sit anymore. So yeah.
We got Colin on. Hey, Colin, thanks for being brave.
Yeah, I'm back.
Excellent. Anyone else, speakers, don't be shy. Or advisory board, as any advisory board, if Kovar's here, anyone else in the advisory board, you are also welcome to join as we just nerd out and talk about things. Rick, what should we talk about first?
I'm trying to think because I think I have Zoom brain and Zoom butt at the same time. Oh, you got one?
That was really just a polite question. Katie's got ideas. She just wants to know.
Of course I do. I took a walk outside and I had more tea. So here's one. We all have, like, Rick, this is year 9 for you. This is probably my 3rd or 4th CTI summit. What did everyone learn that was new? And I'll kick off while you all think about that. Like, what new idea, concept, takeaway, paper, source? And one for me yesterday, it was actually, I forget, one of the many presentations that talked about the intelligence cycle. And I forget who it was, but someone in Slack was like, some intelligence cycles only have 4 phases. And I was like, what? Like, what did they cut out? And someone was like, yeah, this was like basically not used starting 10 years ago. And then someone was like, there's another one that's linear that has feedback along all phases. And I was like, whoa. So my takeaway is like, go rethink the intelligence cycle. Like, maybe I should start, in presentations using a different intelligence cycle. Maybe I'll like one of the others differently. So that was mine. There's not just one intelligence cycle. That's what I learned. Don't everyone talk at once.
Yeah, well, I liked how Brian started out yesterday with applying design thinking. One of the buzzwords, new ideas, right? But applying it to CTI. I think being able to apply these things that maybe aren't native. One of the books I have on my my shelf, Driving Digital Strategy, right? Be able to understand. It talks about Amazon and how they built their consumer model. Be able to understand some of the different methodologies that we can apply to what we're doing. I think it's huge.
Basically everything Sylvia and Che talked about today was fascinating to me, and I want to go look into it more, which is crazy because China was my area of study. That's actually my original degree was international relations, focusing on the Asia Pacific region, and I just had not caught up to the newer methodologies that were being used for information operations. And so that whole talk to me was just fascinating.
Excellent. I see we have some other folks. We got Zena, we got Ryan. So the question that everyone's thinking about is, what new thing did you learn from the summit? Like, even though you've been doing it for a while, like, we all learn things. So what new thing did you learn?
I am, as always, super impressed by Andres's ability to distill huge amounts of information, especially, as a vendor, kind of looking at that. And it's something I have a lot of customers ask me for. I've actually reached out before to him about this, of just what CTI vendors, how do people pick? At my company, we're neutral. I have personal opinions that I don't give to people I talk to. But being able to turn to Andres and say, like, hey, this is a great bit of work that's empirically kind of researched and gone through, and have that as a resource for the community, for me was one of the most exciting. And he had been taunting me with, I'll tell you more, but you're going to have to wait for SANS CTI. So it's nice to see the final output.
I came up with one. I look back at the agenda to give me a refresh to get over my Zoom brain. I really like Selena's talk. I didn't get to see the New York Times talk because of the track, so I'm very interested in that. But just getting someone outside of our domain's perspective, and now she is in our domain. But I just thought the way that journalists think about things and applying it to this discipline, that was just really fascinating to me. So kudos to that talk. I learned quite a bit there.
Yeah, I totally agree, Rick. I think last year in my presentation, I discussed about journalism and CTI. And I think I was expecting this kind of a talk from Selena. So it was really eye-opening. During the talk, I think I Googled a couple of times. So I don't remember even the word, how it was this strange word, not something.
Nut graph.
That's it. Also interesting, so we like pyramids of pain. Pyramids, the reverse pyramid was also really interesting, the concept. So I learned something.
Personally, I like the discussions around when and why you write reports, or, when you communicate and who you communicate to and why. I think that is it's something that I'm constantly trying to learn and relearn. I spend a lot of time in business theory with different business schools, talking about how strategic decision makers make decisions, what kind of information they use to do it, how they can do it better. Because what you're teaching executives, right? What the business schools are teaching executives are how you have to kind of like shoehorn in to that process, right? And I think there were some wonderful discussions and talks around when you write intelligence reports and why you would do it, and things like that. And I thought that those types of talks to me are extremely useful when people can leverage their experience and provide insight into the leaders that they've worked with, and what magic has worked for them. Because I feel like, I could write intel all day long. I think a lot of people can. The magic of intel is not writing intel. The magic of intel is getting somebody to understand it and do something with it. And I think that's the magic. And I think that, we've seen a lot of really good insight during this conference on talking about customers and consumers and IOCs, and Joe Slowick's talk about how we do things better, with IOCs, and how we think of our intelligence in different ways. So I thought all of that, just that whole line of discussion that's being had in the various tracks, was excellent.
I've got
How long were you lurking here? I didn't know you were here this whole time.
I don't always, show up as expected, Rebecca.
Passive collection. I'm seeing some questions coming in on Zoom, so let's dig into those and get everybody's perspective there. There's a comment from Mandy. A lot of talks about intel requirements, and she'd like to know if the speakers have certain interview questions when they're talking to stakeholders. I'll start with one that I use. I'm always interested in, like, what do they get paid on? I don't say it like that, but what is your objective? What do you get bonused on is kind of what I'm trying to pull out of it, so that if I can align my goals with what their priority is, like there's a saying in sales, like you do what you get paid on, you do what you get bonused on. So for me, I want to know how my stakeholder is incentivized, and then see if I can line up my strategy to theirs so that we're both going in the same direction. What do some of the others on the line think?
When I'm working with other security teams, like when CTI is filling the role of supporting like the SOC or a red team, I like to ask them, like, what are their pain points? What are the parts of their process that are difficult for them? Because that's where we can jump in and use CTI to try and make things a little smoother. And so not only are you kind of helping the process there and meeting a need and filling a requirement, but you're also building that goodwill and faith between the teams. Because if you can get across the point that you're an enabling function, and that you're helping them, and that you care about what is going to make their jobs easier and make them more able to focus on things that that I don't want to say are harder for them, but if we can kind of take care of some of the things that they really wish they didn't have to deal with, then next time they have a problem, they're going to come to you, and you're going to start to build kind of a holistic idea of what is actually important to them.
Okay, really quick, a really good tip. This actually, I'm going to mention MITRE ATT&CK. So for the reports, I found a really, really easy question. I'm like, do you want techniques or do you want procedures? for the specific reports. So I don't know if you look at all of the reports out there, but some of them, they just list the technique and they don't go into the specific procedure. But then there's other ones that actually use the specific procedure. So that helps me set expectations for whatever report it is that I'm writing for them. And it's an easy question. So
I'm going to jump in and make this spicy, and I'm going to lay it out there that no one should just be reporting attack techniques without any other detail. Like, if you have a use case for that, I'd be very, very curious. I will buy that, like, attack navigator, like a visualization for an executive. Okay. But a technique without a procedure is not very useful, because there are techniques like command and scripting interpreter. That could be about 11 zillion things. And so please, if you use attack techniques, please put something for the procedures. So I'm just throwing that in there. Yep, just saying. I'm going on mute now. You all can be nice again.
Colin, I see you coming off mute.
Yeah, and I would support Rebecca. I mean, CTI is a support function, right? You know, intelligence is supporting that. How can we support SOC? How can we support response? How can we support vulnerability management, right? How can we give them the insights to be able to prioritize the vulnerability, or even decide that something we can wait months to mitigate, right? Something maybe in a library, for example, right? And then executives that I'm going to reiterate. I'm going to go a little bit on what you said, Rick, but also what keeps them up at night, right? What's their biggest concern? Is their biggest concern, I kept, from my CISO, I kept getting asked about ransomware. And it wasn't ransomware he was concerned about. It was the business continuity, that there was going to be a disruption to operations from that perspective. So being able to, when you see a concern, understand why, and what's their, using CTI terms, what's their motive, right? What's their, why are they concerned about that? What are they concerned about? Are they concerned about operations? Are they concerned about a bonus? Are they concerned about revenue? And to some extent, EBITDA is a common concern, right? How does it affect earnings? A single incident may not affect earnings, but multiple incidents chained together, as we've seen in the past couple months, definitely start to raise some big flags.
This is nothing new, right? Some of the best advice I ever got when I was 18 years old and an E1 in the Navy was go read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? And it's just understanding, if you figure out what your boss does and what makes him successful or her successful, you're going to be more successful. And if you're not, you should find a new boss. But if you're aligning there, if you're doing things that are drastically out of alignment with what your management or your company does, you're probably either in the wrong company, the wrong slot, or you're wrong. So it's, it isn't new, right? CTI is still relatively a new process, but the intelligence aspect and engineering your bosses and your company is not necessarily new.
Hey, I have a question.
I had a meeting set up actually next week to talk about how to provide support to a new team. And the title of the meeting is How to Win Friends and Influence People. So you're absolutely right. Critical skill.
Che, I wanted to ask you, first of all, I'm thrilled that you're still awake with us, but with your customers there, is there anything that's meaningful or captures the attention that kind of helps you accomplish your goals?
Sorry again. Sorry.
When it comes to your intelligence customers there, is there anything that you use to effectively communicate with them or to connect with them in a way that you're going to be successful in, delivering whatever your product is going to be?
Oh yeah, for to understand our customer need is our first priority, and I think a good threat intelligence for us means to solve the customer's problem, to solve the threat they're facing. And in our time zone, the GMT +8, in the time zone, our major focus is China and North Korea. So I think we have the special geographic location and I wouldn't say the great expertise, but I would say the right amount of expertise we need to help our customers. So to communicate and to help them, I think is that's okay. That's good. Okay, so yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think you probably have more than just the right amount of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I think you might be underselling a little bit. Let me switch questions. We've got, I don't know, actually quite a few. I hadn't checked it in a while. Let's see.
Can I give a quick shout out to Jay and his co-speaker? I wasn't here when you all asked what did you learn from the summit, and I thought that the Chinese info operations, both in front of and behind the Great Firewall, was really amazing. That's a space that I don't spend a lot of time learning about or looking into, and it was really great. And so I plan on reading all those associated reports and following your work. So yeah, great stuff.
I echo that 100%. Follow you, and I'm going to read all the material that you guys have put out. Here's a good one. Maybe let me go with Sergio on this one to kick us off. Can you just describe how you construct a CTI team? What skills, capabilities do you want to have on the team?
Oh yeah, it is. It's black magic, is what it is. I mean, you have people like Selena on my team, right? And so you get Selena on a team, and the team just happens. It's like this. I don't know. It's magic. It's like a lotus flower. So I think that I think for me, is fundamentally that CTI. I think the problem that we have with CTI is that. And the reason why I think we all love it so much is that there's endless arguments that can be made because it's not one thing to one person. In fact, one of the best things I tell people to go read all the time is a book, or it's kind of like an article, but a really long book called Getting to Know the President from 1952 to 2012. And it's all about how the presidential daily brief process has changed for each and every president. From 1952 to 2012. And so what it does is it really highlights that intelligence is never static. There's no one way to do it. That the people that you're answering to, the customers you have, are absolutely different from, I mean, heck, in the industrial control space, the customers I have change all the time. Either there's new people that go into the companies, right? My customers that I'm working with, they have new technology they're deploying. Digital transformation is a real thing. They're bringing online new plants. All of a sudden there's a cookie factory in my, in my domain space, and I'm like, oh, now I got to learn about cookie factories. And so I think the cool thing about Intel is you have to be super agile to that aspect of it. And it frustrates, honestly. I think the biggest challenge for me, and this gets to like building a good Intel team, the biggest challenge for me as a manager is helping analysts through the constant change that occurs. And that understanding that CTI is a constantly changing thing, and that you have to evolve almost month by month to what's happening and what your customers need to know. And I think so for me, the biggest thing about an Intel team has to be a broad breadth of skills and knowledge and experiences of huge diversity, like Selena here, right? Coming from CNN, right? I was like, Selena's calling me and I'm like, a CNN reporter wants to join my threat intel team. Okay, so, and we had this great conversation, and it was, that how wonderful it was to have this diversity of experience and background coming onto the team. And basically, that just really helps us kind of maneuver very easily through a changing threat landscape and a changing customer landscape all the time. And so I think to me, the biggest thing you have is what I like to do is I create a fairly small team, because I like to keep Intel teams fairly tight. And I like it to be highly diverse, both in background and skills and perspective. And then I like to matrix the heck out of it. I like to say, no, you're going to work with this person and that person and that person. Everything becomes a school project, which is like, for some people, the worst, it's like they woke up in a hell land, right? But effectively, like what it does is it allows us to maximize our strengths, everybody's strengths, and minimize everybody's weaknesses, because we cover for each other. And so for me, it's like, what's the one thing I've got to have on my Intel team? I don't know, good communicators. What's the second thing I got to have on my Intel team? I don't know, probably good technologists. You know, and then, but other than that, really, it's just about getting the people who can be agile and work together, and really, you know, try to get to that matrix approach. So when I'm building an Intel team, those are the things I'm really looking for.
Anybody else? I'm looking for people coming off mute. That's the sign that you've got something to add to the conversation. Anybody? Colin?
Yeah, I'll speak up. I've built a couple different teams, and as well as our IBM team, we're supporting clients as well as work with the CISO team. So I see it all over the place. That, I mean, like I said, you know, Intel we're not our own customers. So having somebody that understands the business or maybe understands operations, I think adds a new concept, a new point of view, a new perspective that is critical. You know, I've hired Intel staff over the years. You know, some from military, some from the public or the private sector. Definitely having somebody that has experience applying Intel outside of cyber adds new insights, no question. I mean, even from a reporting standpoint, you need somebody that can communicate. You need somebody that can communicate, that understands Intel practice, understands the business, and can relate it. What I like to say is operationalize, right? That how do we make this Intel real? That we have to be able to relate it to what we're doing. Yeah, anybody else?
Oh, I'd say it would be really, really nice to have people that are actually interested in cyber threat intelligence. I found that that's useful. I mean, I know that that's kind of obvious and like something dumb to say, but believe it or not, sometimes, especially in larger orgs, people pivot through roles. And, you know, just to have the title or to be in the department or whatever. And, you know, speaking with a lot of people around the world, I've just found that if you just have a natural interest in it, you're going to do better. So I look for that.
One comment I would use, and then maybe see if anyone else has a name, we can move on to next, because I have a team at Digital Shadows as well. And on the team, like for me, like for the passion, like one of our most recent hires doesn't have any cyber intelligence experience. The individual speaks 7 or 8 languages, and we're going to teach him the cyber. It's actually kind of Sergio's point on the matrixing. We're going to have the skill sets where people have strengths and weaknesses. But what I think I found is you can't hire unicorns. You have to have a non-unicorn strategy, right? You've got to be able to recruit people. Zena, you were mentioning people from other orgs, right? Could you get someone from your help desk that has a passion, that wants to learn? I actually really like hiring people that are within the org and they know the company culture. And, you know, they're known to be a good employee, a good person, not a jerk, right? And then you kind of teach them. So if you can sprinkle in your seasoned folks and then have a stable of staff that you're ramping up, and you have a plan to retain them, you know, for more than 18 months, right? It's 18 months and you're going to move to this role and you're going to do that. It's really, really key, because I think the worst thing is to lose someone because you didn't have the right opportunities for them. So it's not just how you build a team, but I think it's critical in like, how do you maintain the team? Because if you lose a skill set on a team, you know, your operational capability could take a big hit. If I lose Russian analysts, I've got backfills. If I lose a bunch of Russian analysts, I'm going to have some challenges. So I think that's a really important one as well.
I would love to flip this question, piggybacking off my own, like we talked about yesterday. I'm really focusing on leadership. And so we've been talking a lot about what do we want in a team that we're building, what members of a team, but what would we want in a leader of our team? If we had somebody who was leading a cyber threat intelligence team, what are the skills and traits that we look for in one of those?
Oh, I'll go really quick. Knowing how to write confidence assessments, or at least being able to understand them from a threat intelligence perspective. I mean, all of the writing talks that we had during the summit in 2021, just having a good grasp on that, I feel is important, since they have to review it and give the final thumbs up. So it's helpful.
I'm really looking for someone who doesn't want to make me work on school projects. So someone who doesn't make me work on school projects, who doesn't believe in matrix organizations, who likes large teams rather. It's just something that I prefer.
Sounds like the anti-Sergio right here.
Oh, love you, Ryan. I love you so much, man.
Uh-oh, it's Joe.
I think it's a lot of, oh yeah, slow it.
Joe, let's ask Joe what he looks for in a CTI boss.
I'll step out now.
No, you can stay. I'm just giving you a hard time. Please finish your comment, Sergio.
I was going to say that the biggest thing I think is empathy, and I'm going to just give a shout out to like that. A lot of the people that we work with in this community come from very difficult backgrounds, whether they're personal or professional, and I've been fortunate enough to have managed a lot of very valuable people that are just personally valuable people, like that are just good people. And I think the biggest challenge we have in CTI is that a lot of people, we have to realize that especially in the Western world, we're coming out of like some of the longest wars, continuous wars that have ever happened. And we're pulling a lot of people from the military and the government who have fought those wars into this space. And there's a lot of mental health challenges in this. And so it's very, very important that the leaders in threat intelligence, especially if you're leveraging people who are in those spaces, they have to be very empathetic to what a lot of people have gone through now and moving into CTI.
Empathy is just a good skill for life in general in 2020 and 2021 in particular. Some comments here. Let's see. Andrew makes a comment that a lot of times the people he's hiring don't have the skill sets he's looking for. If they've got some minimum levels, he'll hire and teach them what they need to learn. So I think that's great. And it talks to like, you can't always find or pay for all of the unicorns that are out there. Yeah, lots of nodding on the empathy question, Sergio, there. Hannah has a question on mentoring. Maybe we save that one for the next session.
Rick, I think I saw Selena unmuting. Selena, do you have something to say?
Oh yeah, I just kind of wanted to chime in because we're talking about, like the leadership or what you look for when you're hiring. But I think, as candidates or when people are part of a team as a whole, I think it's also really important. And when you're talking about like you can teach skills, I am a firm believer in anyone can learn any skill, but the most important thing is like kindness, to be a good person and to be willing to work and be a team member and collaborate. And then you can learn from others and learn those technical skills. But I think like across an organization, across a team, regardless if you're the leader or, if you're the lowest person on the totem pole or an intern or whatever, I think that is so important. And I think that in our industry, sometimes we can kind of lose sight of that when you're talking about, unicorns or rock stars or just a conversation that happens on the internet. And I think it's helpful to remind ourselves that kindness and empathy and just being good people is so, so important because ultimately we're all trying to keep everyone safe. But yeah, it's just good to remember that, I think.
I love that, Selena. And I wanted to just jump in because this is something that I've just reflected on this week. And I agree, collaboration and someone that is easy to work with, but something just to personally reflect here a little bit. Someone on Twitter kind of pointed out to me that on my team in the past, I've talked about culture fit. And when I say culture fit, I mean people who share my team's core values of loving cyber threat intel, as Zena said, people who want to be transparent, who want to get after adversaries. And someone pointed out that culture fit can sometimes be one of those words for people who look like you or act like you. And so I just was thinking of that and just kind of wanted to share that for everyone to think about a little bit. And I'm going to try to change my wording from culture fit to what are exactly the things I'm looking for? Like Selena said, I want people who want to work in a team because that's how we do CTI and where I work. So just something to throw out there for folks to think about.
I too, Katie, I want to message how important that is because I learned that same lesson. I think others have informed me of how dangerous that perspective is in hiring, and I have made it a personal objective of mine. And so I don't actually care about culture fit anymore. I never even think about that question any longer. My question as a hiring manager now is, will this person change my team for the better? And that's all I ask, because guess what? Every time you bring somebody new into a team, or every time you lose somebody, it's a different team. Managers hate thinking of it that way because that's hard, and it's hard for change management, and it's hard, but your culture changes with every person that comes in and with every person that leaves. Especially on small teams, of course, but larger teams, it's a little bit more, easier to kind of forget. So now, at least personally, my approach to that is I just want people who come in and change my team positively. And so instead of thinking about, do you fit? You know what? You're not going to fit because we're going to be a different team by the time you come in. So.
Just to add in really quickly, I'm going to find the link. Someone literally sent this to me this week, thinking about a culture add versus a culture fit. And I think this is such a great topic to think about with CTI analysts, and thinking about like complementary skill sets. Like, who are you going to add that's going to challenge your biased thinking that we all have? Who are you going to add that changes up your skill sets rather than culture fit, culture add? So I'll find that link somewhere in Twitter.
Oh, I think that's a great point, because I've definitely had people that worked for me that we've had heated discussions repeatedly, but we walk away and we come back the next day and we're just as good. It's a bit about that meshing, right? That you can have those conflicts, but you can sharpen the iron. You can work with each other to kind of understand, why do you think this isn't going to work? Or why do you think something different? And have those conversations constructively to ultimately come to a conclusion that, okay, maybe we don't know everything, but this is the direction we're going to go from that perspective. But I think there is the difference, though. You don't want somebody that's not going to be a team player, that's not going to have that constructive difference and be able to work together, because ultimately we're always dealing with limited resources. So we have to, as Sergio said, as Rick said, have that matrix to be able to learn from one another, as well as to benefit the strengths and weaknesses of each other.
And I
there was
think
that great talk earlier today too, right? With the gentleman, I apologize, I forget the names, but the two gentlemen were talking about the biases of threat intel for Varus, and how all of those reports come from the same place. And one of the benefits of my job pre-COVID was I used to travel all over the world and talk to threat intel companies. And my favorite was going to Asia or Australia, and they're like, oh, we love MITRE ATT&CK, but none of the threats they look at have to do with anything in our region. And Katie and I talked about this in our Black Hat talk. And the reason being, of course, is the majority of the people who work at MITRE and work on MITRE ATT&CK read English reports that are created by Western threat intel companies. And so what you're digesting is that, and they needed threats, so we're very hyper local to their specific area. And some of the most interesting threat intel teams I've seen are ones that have different nationalities, or people who are focused in the specific, not just the language, but the specific dialect or region. And there can be some huge dialect differences, and kind of going through as you're reading this threat intel, right? Which goes back to the that culture may be extremely different, but it doesn't mean you're both not all trying to do the right thing for your company or for the goal.
One thing I thought, there's been a lot of questions that are coming in on the career development, and I thought maybe we should transition to those, help everybody improve their skill sets. The first one I like, and I think a lot of people struggle with this one, actually myself included, is how to be effective with a mentor. So Hannah's question is like, how do you find a good mentor? And then as a part of that, like if someone's going to come to you for mentoring, like how do you prepare your pitch to a mentor? It's not like, will you mentor me? What are you trying to accomplish? So I don't know if anyone out here is actively mentoring people and what lessons they've learned from that, but I think this is a topic that would be really good for us to dig into.
For what it's worth, I do a very crappy job of it, but I do it. So mentoring is certainly something very important in this skill, because if nothing else, CTI is a funny discipline where we don't necessarily have a set in stone training path. There's no like, oh, do this degree or get this cert, no offense to SANS, and thou art threat intel analyst and go forth and do great things. So there's certainly lots of industry knowledge and other items that come into play. What's interesting about it, and I think Rob Lee, not the other Rob Lee, made a point about this in chat, is mentorship really, the spinach chin Rob Lee, exactly, is you need to come into a mentoring relationship with concrete questions and asks, and not just expect like, hey, I'm new, come mentor me. Like, no, like if you ask me that, I'm going to be nice, but I'm going to say like, I don't got time for that. But having reasonably specific goals or something approaching them in order to focus the conversation and drive us towards some definite end state, I think is pretty key. And that's not to poop on people who are looking for mentorship, and I'm trying to censor myself here, but it's really just about trying to do some preliminary research and understanding of what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then leveraging that in order to ask for specific advice for people who, I'm sure I'm not the only one, are pretty freaking busy. And, you know, we're trying our best, but it's hard to take open-ended questions and run from that.
I actually do quite a bit of mentoring, both for my own company and other places. And two things I'll point out: there's a difference between mentoring and advocating, and I do both. And mentoring is a much deeper relationship that I tend to take. Advocating I'll do for a lot of different people, but that really just means I don't just open the door. I put my foot out and make sure that it's open for the person to walk through, and I'll do that consistently. For mentoring, as Joe said, I require us only do a year. And that's my personal preference, but in a year we have to do something. And if I actually engage, and I believe it is a relationship between two people, it's basically I'm going to mentor you for a year, and at the end we need to have a thing. And that could be a variety of things. That could be working towards a promotion. That could be, let's get your GitHub page. That could be talking at a SANS conference, whatever it be, but we're working towards a finite goal. And the end of the year, we'll always be friends. I'll always advocate for you. But I really think working in year-long chunks with specific documented outcomes is important for both people. Otherwise, to Joe's point, it's kind of like, sure, how can I, this isn't the medieval guilds. We're not getting apprenticeships for 7 years and journeymen, right? So it's a little bit of a different, but those are the two. I think there's a big difference between the two that are often conflated. And I think you can do one without the other, but you shouldn't necessarily not do any of them, especially if you're frankly a white male in seniority at a company. There's a lot of stuff you can do to help out everyone else come after you.
I just got super excited. Thank you for humoring me, Ryan, because I have such a good advocacy example for Ryan and I from this event. So this was like 3 or 4 years ago when we were in Bethesda and it like snowed, and I was just attending the CTI summit. And we were at like a happy hour thing. And this was like when I was still like doing government-y work with MITRE, and like no one knew who I was. And like 3 people knew what attack was. And Ryan knew who I was. And Ryan brought me over, introduced me to Becca and Rick, and said, hey, Becca, Rick, this is my friend Katie. She works on the MITRE attack team. She's awesome, and you should get to know her. And like, lo and behold, weird. Like, here I am a few years later. I teach for SANS, and I'm one of the co-chairs. Like, something as simple as that can make a huge difference. So I just wanted to say thanks, Ryan, and give an example of advocacy.
And I was going to say, I remember that. And that's I remember that year, and I remember meeting you, and I am so happy that Ryan did bring you over, and that and actually that's another thing, talking about being not like you've ever had a formal mentor-mentee relationship, but there's a big difference between meeting someone at a conference and saying like, oh, hello, nice to meet you. But then following up and sticking with it and saying, do you have anything I could recommend? Or, oh, are the links to the conference out yet? Or something like that follow-up and that establishing of a relationship is really important, because like we've been saying, especially a lot of us have large workloads. We do things, we have our day jobs, we have side projects, we have families. And so it's like almost if you wait for somebody if you say like, oh, well, if they wanted to help or if they wanted to provide guidance, they would reach out to me. But somebody who says like, got 5 minutes or time for a cup of coffee? Like I was so happy, Katie. Like I actually had forgotten that that's how we met. The CTI Summit is great for so many things, but it's amazing what you can do if you have the confidence in yourself to say, I want to learn more, and I'm more than happy to reach out to people.
So
oh, go ahead, Zena.
Oh, I take a little bit a different approach, I guess you could say. So I have a women's and information security study group. There's like 1.6 thousand. There's a lot of people in it. And so it's basically kind of like a tribal thing where people from different backgrounds, so it doesn't solely rely on me. So I basically have it set up in a funnel type system where I filter out kind of like let it rain, like different opportunities and trainings and everything under the sun. Ryan Kovar actually came and did a training for the group. He was so kind to do that, super helpful. I still get feedback to this day on how amazing it was and how it helped them and how it's helped people get promotions and like all this crazy stuff. And so basically, instead of just me and like my beliefs and it being all about me, all of these other amazing women come in from like Sharon DeGrippo to people in risk management from like all different backgrounds that are in cybersecurity. And so people will post a random comment or whatever question. And then all of these people come in and like offer support or guidance or resources or whatever it is so that they have multiple perspectives and the people can make up their own mind. You know what I mean? Like they're smart, they're intelligent, they can do it. Here's a couple different perspectives to play with, additional resources. Here's, a free training. If you have any questions, like we're here to help. So I guess that's how I kind of do it, to be honest. So
What was the name of your group again, Zena? We had a question from Gabe.
It's called Women in Information Security. So like one of the members, she was so excited about it. She anonymously like gives out certification attempts and trainings, and it's just a group that works together. It's 100% free, and it's like tribal knowledge where it's not all about me, if that makes sense. So if I die, not saying I will, tomorrow, but if I do, like it'll live on beyond me. So
you've got your resiliency plan, as any cybersecurity professional should have.
Yeah.
One comment that I would have for people is when you're engaging with mentoring or even just advocate, like Ryan was saying, if you could do some self-reflection on what you want to do and kind of what your goals and outcomes are, I think that prepares for the conversation. Like, where do you want to be in 2 years? And then how can this individual do it? At the beginning of every year, I like to sit down and do what's my career path for the next 5 years. It's almost like we do this in businesses, our strategic planning. We need to do this more personally, both on our financial planning and stuff like that, but on your careers. And I actually think now's one of the benefits, I guess, of everyone not traveling as much as many people did, is people are more available now to do a Zoom, to catch up with people. So maybe it's another full-blown mentoring. It's, hey, I'm networking. What's that book? Never Eat Lunch Alone. I think that's the title, right? It's an excellent book. And that concept, like, set a goal, try to talk to one person a week in the community. Guaranteed, there's a lot of people that are attendees and speakers here that would sit up and have conversations with you, in the coming months after this conference. So maybe if it's a personal takeaway, why don't you try to set a goal in the next month to engage with 5, 6, 10 of us, whatever number you think is realistic. And it could just be on Twitter. Then it's scalable, and then it could grow into something more than that. But I think that would be a good activity for everyone to take on. Build your networks.
So to piggyback on what Rick said, I mean, imagine having, a lot of people contacting you at once for like a 30-minute coffee break. I did the math. I'm like, that's like a full-time job. So what I tell people instead, I'm like, give me like the top 3 or 5 bullet points of what you want addressed. And like, that's honestly how I do it and maintain my sanity. I'm like, just bullet point me, please. So
not to disagree with Rick at all, because I think those were excellent points, and with Zena carrying on, I would also like to just emphasize to anyone who's listening along that having a plan and doing all that work or whatever is certainly advantageous and puts you in a good spot. But if you're not there, don't fret. And like, even just hearing Rick's ideas there, it's like I get anxiety thinking like, holy shit, like, excuse me, Katie, that like
I'm the swear police.
Yes,
You're gonna put a quarter in the swear jar, Joe.
Oh, okay. But it's just thinking about that, it's like, wow, I've never done any of that. I'm working in a field that I didn't even know existed 10 years ago. Heck, I didn't even really know it existed 6 years ago. And here I am. So I would say that depending on where you are within your career life cycle, so to speak, if you have a definite goal, then yes, you should be working towards that goal. Sorry, you have one, then go do the legwork. If you don't, though, and you just think this stuff is kind of cool, don't be afraid necessarily just to dip your toe in the water and try and see where the current takes you, because that's kind of how I got here, and I'm doing okay. So, don't be afraid to take some risks and experiment a little at the same time.
There's a fantastic book, and I think we already talked about the design catchphrase recently, but called Designing Your Life. And it talks about taking a design approach to like what you want to do, and not saying like you have to have one plan. There is one thing that you are meant to do, and you go to college and you get a job and you work up the ladder, but that your life can be broken into kind of chunks of 2 to 5 years of what do you want to do. And so as both a person who's trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, and also as a mentor, it's a really good book to read just to get some ideas of the types of questions to ask. And they talk about this concept, I think it's kind of what Joe was talking about, of prototyping your life. If you think you want to be a SOC analyst, and you don't want to set up a formal year-long mentor relationship because you're still trying to figure it out, prototype it out. Find someone who is a SOC analyst and say like, just tell me what your day is like. What do you go through? What are the things you do? And it's not always easy in our field, but if you can like shadow somebody or do an internship, but that you don't have to decide right now, what am I going to do for the next 30 years? And that you have time to kind of figure it out. And there are different ways and methods of basically building a prototype, which is something I think all of us are familiar with, and seeing if it's going to work.
I have something on that as well, Rebecca. There's an incredible woman at my company. She's the president of the company, Susan St. Ledger, incredibly inspirational human being, former NSA analyst, went into business, worked at Salesforce, the president of Splunk. She's actually, I think her last day at Splunk is today. She's going to Okta to be the president of Okta. But she's been one of my mentors and advocates for the last 2 or 3 years. And she has this concept of screw ladders, you should look at buckets. And I really like that concept, and it lines up with what Joe and yourself said, which is a ladder implies a vertical, like a rise through the ranks. In large companies and other places, it's not necessarily about rising to the next role or next position in your role. It might be saying like, I want to become a SOC analyst. What are the things that it requires to become a SOC analyst? I should probably know in the 21st century how to do some sort of Python. Maybe that's what you're going to say. Or I need to know how to write signatures or detections. Or if you're looking at CTI, you're going to say like, I need to learn how to communicate well, because that is a key function of being a CTI analyst. And stop thinking of it as like bullet points, but just, if I want to do this role, how do I fill this bucket? If I want to become a executive in the business, what do I need to do? And for her example, of course, would be, she's like, I wanted to become the president of a sales org. I don't want to become a CEO. And so she had to learn how to have a P&L and all this stuff, which I have no interest in. But the point is, the bucket concept remains the same. And it's a good way to kind of structure your career without having to be intimidated by ladders, or more importantly, like, I have to have a 10-year plan, because in cybersecurity, I don't know what's going to happen in 3 years. We talked about this on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. Like, I always tell people, you're 2 years away from being the expert in something in the world, because in 2 years, a new technology can come out and you can become the person to know and master and talk about that. And my knowledge of Binion Vines and token RIN networking, with the exception of some very antiquated ships in the US Navy, are probably not that useful. So a good 5 to 10 years of my knowledge base of the last 24 is worthless, but anyone can kind of become something if they want to put the knowledge in.
You can be whatever you want to be. So at this point, what we're going to do is we have some final housekeeping things. So I'm going to be the adult in the room before I go get some Prosecco. So a couple closing things, and then I do want to do like a screenshot Zoom Brady Bunch. So first off, really would appreciate if you could take a moment to do these evaluations. The link's in the Slack for you. We really appreciate your feedback. It helps us figure out like, what should we do next year? Because last year you all said we want more case studies. And so this year we were like, let's have more case studies, like the awesome Team 5 one today. So if you can take a moment to do those evaluations, we really appreciate that. Moving on to the next slide. Trying to remember what else we have. Oh yeah, if you liked the CTI Summit, you're probably going to love the DFIR Summit. The DFIR Summit is another big one for the year. It's going to be free. It's online. It's in July, but the call for presentations is open now. So if you have an idea, great, submit your proposal. Hopefully you learned something, took away new connections from this summit. So DFIR Summit is another big one. It's going to be awesome. get those ideas in. And then we also talked about this and how we have so many new people. The New to Cyber Summit, don't miss that one in April. I know we got a request for having some new to CTI content, which I'm going to keep pushing the co-chairs, David and Phil, on. So that's going to be in April. There's no CFP formally for that, but I think Jen Santiago mentioned you can email her, reach out if you have ideas. So don't miss that one. And then I think we have 1 or 2 more slides. Oh, we wanted to wish Becca and Rick a happy burn day. See what we're really good at memes here. Happy birthday, Becca, Rick. And every year it falls right around their CTI summit. And so just wanted to say to Becca and Rick and Rob, thank you. And just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone. I'm going to forget people, of course. So Becca, Rick, please help me out, even though it's your birthday, to thank everyone. And I also wanted to do a kind of a group picture. So in particular, if we could get Ashton, if you're listening, could you come on video? Because we just wanted to give you a huge round of applause because everyone loves your graphic recordings. So Ashton, if you want to come on, we're seeing your art as well, though. There you are. Hi, Ashton. Thank you so much for being here. You have been amazing.
Thank you. My brain's pretty fried at this point, but I appreciate it.
I don't know how you kept track of everything because my brain's fried and I wasn't drawing everything. So thank you so much. Let's do a group photo. All right, so 1, 2, 3. I got it. Excellent. So Ashton, thank you. Who else do we need to thank? We have so many people behind the scenes at SANS, Jen Santiago, Brian. We have folks sharing the slides. We have all of these people throughout this summit, Allison, Emily, Tom, who have been answering your questions, who have been helping out. Thank you to all of those people. Who else am I forgetting, Rick, Becca?
Folks who work together to make this summit free. So thank you.
Absolutely. We are so grateful. And obviously, thanks to you all for attending. Really appreciate that. Rick, any final closing thoughts? And then we're going to go happy hour style after this. So I want to give you all permission. If you want to leave, you can, but we'll chat career stuff for the rest of the time.
Oh, I just wanted to thank the community, right? The community of mentors that were helping the speakers, the community of the speakers, and the community of the attendees. I really like the community that we've built. And I'd like to think, even in this virtual world, we're inclusive and, we want to meet new people and expand our friends. So I do look forward to meeting y'all in real life for the new folks out there.
Yeah, and a couple other people, Jessica Hill, Sarah Tyler. There are so many people who just pop up in the Slack and we're like, hey, could someone contact the speaker? And they just do it. Nothing like this happens easily or without a ton of work. So this is awesome. I'm so happy that we have had so many people come and join us in the community. So,
and to all the speakers, I don't know if you mentioned those and I just zoned out, but thank you so much. We had amazing speakers this year, every year. This year we had a lot of them. We had 2 tracks full and that was amazing. So thank you all.
That reminds me, our advisory board. Oh my gosh, how could I forget? Zeno's right in front of me. Zeno's on the advisory board. I can't even remember everyone on the advisory board. Chris McConkey was on the advisory board. Kovar was on the advisory board. Zena, who else did we have? We had so many amazing people. Yep.
Amy.
Kristen, I believe. So thank you to the advisory board. Chris Cochran, I think, was there. So obviously there are probably a good 100 people to thank. And we miss people, but thank you all so much. So I think I'm going to call that the official end. So unless anyone objects, I'm going to go grab a bottle of Prosecco and Joe's got his beer. So any speakers, y'all have been doing CTI for a while. If you want to stick around, we're going to officially pivot to the happy hour career chat. Cause I know Selena was like, isn't this happy hour?
Isn't it happy hour?
Yeah, it is. So we're going to pivot and finalize with a happy hour career chat. So you can stay, you can go. We won't judge. Either way is cool.
I like how Katie has to emphasize that it's I'm getting a bottle of Prosecco. I'm getting
a bottle. So
yeah,
Becca,
exactly.
Can you hold things down while I go get my Prosecco?
Well, yes, but then we're swapping. So you go, I'm good.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take breaks.
Teamwork. All about the teamwork.
All right, BRB with my Prosecco.
All right.
Andreas, what time is it for you right now? It's got to be late.
It's very late, apparently.
Yes.
I have to go, I guess. I mean, it's already 12 o'clock, eh? So thanks everyone, and next year face to face.
Yes, we will
It's good
see you
seeing you, Frank.
then.
Cheers, guys.
Oh, yes. So I think if you're a participant and you're still hanging out, we are trying to monitor all the Slack channels while they're still up. We do have a happy hour career chat room in Slack. And so I think if it's possible, and we can pivot conversations there, like any questions people have. So during the panel, once Katie gets back with her bottle of Prosecco, we can answer questions there, but we will still be monitoring because we know Slack is crazy. And we've got people right now in the panel channel and in the track 1 channel. So we're going to kind of keep an eye on everything, but the more you can post in the happy hour career channel, that would be great. Pivot complete. All right. We are good. We are set. And so the idea for this happy hour and focusing on careers in particular actually came out of the fact that during one of our co-chair meetings, when we were kind of talking about, I can't remember, speakers and aligning the tracks or something like that. And Rob started talking about hiring. And Sergio, hopefully, this is probably rants you've heard a lot. Rob has some very strong opinions on hiring and about things like not giving a salary range and not saying, oh, well, what are you looking for? But being clear with people who are applying, like what the expectations are of the role. And from there, it just kind of snowballed into this, like, there's so much good information that kind of institutionally that we have amongst ourselves. I learned so much from Rob. He runs a company. He's a CEO. He has to think about a lot of things career-wise that I haven't had to think of. My leadership studies. I'm thinking about different things, and so we decided, if we have these questions and if we're constantly learning new things, that so many people out there must have questions as well. And so amongst the 12 of us hanging out, we should be able to hopefully provide some guidance or some experience or some tips around kind of making your way in this career area. So as soon as, because everybody in the chat is going to get their drinks as well, so there are no questions now. But we will we'll kick off as soon as the rest of the group comes back.
Well, I guess to fill space in the meantime, I think that was an interesting discussion that we left off on in terms of trying to find a route to this field, because it is a new field and there's really not a route right now. So we got a number of people who are missing at the moment, but I don't have an intelligence background or even a computer science background for that matter before I got into this field. I know folks like Sergio, he's got a comp sci background, but I'm pretty sure when he was doing that, he didn't realize he was going to get into threat intelligence and the diamond model. I know Selena didn't. I know Zena didn't doing real estate and all sorts of other things before doing this. And I don't know about everyone else. And the reason I bring that up is that this is still a emerging field in a lot of ways. And we're still trying to figure out what the way is to get here. And that's kind of advantageous for a lot of people at the moment, because it's not like, oh crap, I missed out when I was an undergrad of majoring in XYZ. I can't do this now unless I go back to school. Like, no, actually you don't. You could probably figure this out because, like I did, other people have. It's really game on. Just how ambitious are you? And are you willing to pull the PDF Ahoyer off of the CIA website and plow through that a couple of times, among some other things?
Ooh, also too, it's very motivating when someone tells you that you can't do it. So that's what happened to me. And I was like, screw that. Guess what I'm going to do? So since then, spoken at Black Hat, RSA, like all of these things. So that was very motivating.
Yeah, and I think, well put, Joe. It's an emerging field. And as well, that what I like to say is intelligence is a glue that ties everything together. So in order to glue, you need to have a background in some of those areas. If you have one foundation you can build upon, whether it's risk management, whether it's even IT operations, and be able to build upon that and expand upon that, you're going to win. You're going to be successful.
Cheers, everybody. Becca, if you need to go get a drink or like make sure your children are okay, something like that, like please go for it.
Probably check on them. I'll be back.
I've got the conch.
I've just created mine all day, so I think they're okay.
You created your children or your dog?
No, my children, of course.
Don't believe him. Don't believe him.
Great.
Just toss them some Cheerios every now and then. They'll be fine.
Where's your puppy? Yeah,
Rick, go get your puppy, please.
She's not actually here right now. Was at the groomer or is coming back from the groomer. She may be back before we wrap up. So,
okay, if she is,
the puppy,
please let us know.
The puppy jumped on Rick's lap when we were doing the prep, and it really derailed the practice. Let me just say.
Very distracting.
In a great way. But yeah.
So another administrative note, I said we were done with that, but a really important thing, everyone's asking, I know we love the Slack, but it's got to go down at 7 p.m. Eastern. And so what I like to do is I just like to copy and paste everything into my local notes. So go ahead and do that. There's also this great dude, Jeff, was Jeff his name? Jeff D. Compiled a whole bunch of the resources that we mentioned during the panel channel yesterday. So I'll post that again. So that was like all the podcasts and things. But yeah, I'm sorry. It's just, it's life. Like it's going to go down at 7 p.m. Eastern. So please copy and paste things, but it's okay because we're all going to be here. Like we're on Twitter. You can like ask us, what was that thing you mentioned? So don't worry about it. All right. I think that's the last administrative thing, but before Rob's supposed to be here in like a few minutes. I wanted to do a thing where every time if Rob swears, I'm going to donate $10 to Girls Who Code for every time he swears. So don't tell him though. Don't tell him, guys. Because then he's just going to it's going to ruin it. So this is like, if anyone doesn't like the swears, then this is how we're going to be okay if Rob swears. Okay. So no one tell him because otherwise it'll be bad.
I felt bad. Someone mentioned in my hallway track that they had kids around during my talk and they were upset. I felt terrible.
Yeah, well, that's why I changed your S word to poop. Because
that's why I created my daughters, Joe, because I knew you were going to talk and I didn't want them to hear it. So.
All right. Do we have actual questions? I completely derailed everything.
Well, Joe being the way he is creates a space for me since, I essentially come from the Wild West, not only real estate, but also Arizona. So thank you, Joe.
Hey, did I know that? You're from Arizona? Me too.
Yeah, I'm from Arizona, born and raised.
I do see a good question in here, Katie.
Yeah.
This is one that would be near and dear to me. Well, we have a fair amount of veterans on here as well. What advice do you have on next work role for someone with an intel offensive cyber that's separating from the Air Force? So I don't know if we have any recent people that have transitioned. It's been a while for me, so it's probably quite different.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 7 years for me at this point. 7 years, 8 years? Anyway. But from a very similar background, if I'm reading between the lines correctly, I found it very enlightening and very eye-opening not to go into something that was directly similar, like, oh, I'll jump to contracting to do the same job I was doing before. That's boring. Or to try to find something very relatively similar in a commercial perspective. I went and I did incident response, which I'd never done before. When I was in the Navy, I'd done the opposite of incident response, more or less, for the most part. And I thought it was incredibly enlightening and really filled in not just a lot of technical holes, but also a lot of the perspective of like, oh, this is how Blue Team works. This is how DFIR works, and really enabled with a fusion of some other things in the background to go forward from there. So, trying to identify what are perspectives that you might not have had, because I think from a CTI perspective, especially, that having an understanding of both offense and defense is pretty critical to understand both what the bad guys are doing, as well as how it's applicable to defenders to make use of that information can be a very viable way of moving forward.
One of the things that we've done at Digital Shadows, we've got a cool thing, and we just in the past year we placed one Army person, but basically these would be some military terms, but people are going to ETS, are going to get out. They're able to basically do an internship. So it's almost as if they went TDY or TAD for the Navy folks. 2 digital shadows. And so we had, in this case, it was a human operator that spent 3 months internship with us, paid for the Army, went back to the Army to transition out, and then joined us full time upon their exit from the Army. So Skills Bridge was the particular program. So I would say to any service members that are on the line, see if your service has a transition program like that. And I'd love to recruit veterans. I love to also recruit non-veterans just because of the whole diversity bit. But I do think there's some really good options. And then I know I only did 4.5 years in the Army, but I know transitioning even in that time is kind of challenging, going from one way of life to another. So I'm particularly interested in helping veterans transition out. So feel free to ping me on that particular one if you'd like.
Yeah, SANS actually has a program as well. I think it's called Vet Success. I'll drop a link in, Vet Success Academy. So that's another thing to look for transitioning folks out of the military.
And the network aspect of things too. I mean, whether that means going to something like a Twitter, LinkedIn, I don't know what else is out there. Like if you say that you are coming from that background and looking for something, people will probably reach out to you, because I know I have in a couple of places. So don't be afraid to ask like, hey, I've just got some questions and this is where I'm coming from, and reach out to a few people and you'll probably find some degree of response out there. But otherwise, I emphasize what Rick was saying, that there are programs in place that really are well designed to move people into, from in uniform to out of uniform, that can be exceptionally valuable.
Yeah, I would just say on the reaching out note, like I get regular messages from people that I don't know. And as long as they're like respectful and polite and they say, hi, my name is so-and-so, and ask a specific question. Like it's tough. I know people sometimes get messages like, will you mentor me? And like, that is tough because a dedicated mentorship is a lot of an ask. Like as Zena said, it could be a full-time job. But if you have like 1 or 2 specific questions, or like, hey, I just wanted to reach out to make a connection in case it could be useful in the future, like give it a shot. A lot of us have quasi open DMs on Twitter or LinkedIn. So it would absolutely echo that. Reach out to people. That's part of this industry, is networking and asking for things. I know people don't like to ask for things, but you can, and it's expected.
Yeah, pretty much every weekend I get some random question, which is wonderful. I think it was a couple weekends ago, someone was working on a project and they needed help with something last minute. And they're like, I know who to message. So they messaged me and I was able to recommend a resource for them. So I love being able to be helpful like that, especially when the question is simple, quick. I can just copy paste, get her done, and help them get their project done. So I definitely love doing stuff like that.
I have a good example from this community. This was actually an intern at Digital Shadows, but they were working on a master's piece on data science. And I thought to myself, who's a data scientist in our community that I could refer to? And so I set up a call with Alex Pinto, who's a multi-time alumni for this. So a lot, maybe it's not full mentoring. It's just, that's a really nice way. You can just do an introduction. Maybe you take 15, 20 minutes of your time, and then you can just kind of connect the dots. So that's something that I think a lot of us would be happy to do. I do see a question here from Mike. It's a career soft skills question. The comment is, I'm a professor at one of the NSA approved schools. And there's 6 NSA Cyber Scholarship competencies. 5 of them are soft skills: human factors, creative problem solving, facilitation, empathy. There's empathy, oral comms, written comms. Do other employers share the importance of these soft skills?
So
I think we're all literally nodding very furiously. Like everyone I saw was like, yes, yes, yes. I mean, just think of how many times all these things were mentioned throughout this summit. Like we had Brian talked about empathy. How many people talked about communication? Selena talked about writing. Chris talked about writing. I saw this question come in, and something that I've been trying to do in my speaking, again, I mentioned culture fit, trying to get that out of my lingo. Soft skills, that to me sort of has the implication like they're soft and fuzzy. And I've switched to trying to call them core skills.
Almost foundational,
because to me, communication, like that's a core skill. That's not soft. That's not easy. Communication is really, really hard. And so those are my thoughts, but I'm sure everyone has thoughts on this.
That's actually, I was going to jump in and say that's actually what we've transitioned to calling them our core skills, because I think just the way that with our biases and with the way human brains work, we counter soft skills with hard skills. And we also seem to, it gives the impression that it's something someone has or they don't have, rather than something that somebody worked towards. Becoming a good communicator, developing empathy, being able to pick up tasks that need to be done, but no one has a particular job role to fill those out. Those are all things that you have to learn and grow and develop. And yes, so every job I've had, every role I've been in, every team I've built, those are core skills that I look for.
Especially if you look, sorry, Selena, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I would actually push back a little bit on this, because I think that people say that they value soft skills, or what people call soft skills, but then in the actual application and hiring, or once one of those people is on a team, it can be really difficult to have their skills be valued the same way as sort of hard skills, I guess. And I've talked about this with a lot of my friends too, because, you know, I have some friends that have made a similar transition from journalism to, you know, private sector, working at a vendor or something. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of talk about like, oh yeah, you know, like changing the word soft skills, not using it anymore, recognizing that writing and communicating is super valuable and important. But when it actually comes down to having that in your organization, I think that, you know, it's still looked down on, frankly. And it's kind of frustrating, like talking to my friends and, you know, various experiences that I've had as well. Like just, you know, even as a journalist, right? Like talking to somebody when you're interviewing them and they'd say something like, oh, well, let me just explain this so your grandma can understand it. And it's just like, why don't you explain it in a technical way as if you were talking to a technical person and I can communicate it to like, right? Like, so it's very difficult to grok that. And I saw a tweet thread recently where someone tweeted, what is a skill that you have that is dead and is no longer like applicable? And a lot of people were tweeting it. And I'm like, soft skills, or right, these like core skills don't die. Like writing is a skill that won't be dead. Communicating is a skill, like unlike COBOL or like programming IBM mainframes, like, okay, these are skills that you have to, that will die and then you relearn something else. But like these core skills, empathy, leadership, communication, are applicable no matter where you are and like across organizations. So I think that, you know, this group is lovely, and I'm like, I know all of you guys super value these like core skills, but I think that overall in the industry, there's still a long way to go.
So
thank you.
That's a
I
good
just
point.
want to say thanks for being brave and speaking up, Selena, and then I'll let Joe speak. Thank you,
No.
Selena.
And Selena, I think we've talked about this a few times, actually, Selena and I, over the course of our years working together and being friends. But I think, and this is coming from someone whose very first technical experience was programming COBOL on a ZOS mainframe at a job 15 plus years ago. But I think there's a nuance here where we can't say that any one or the other is more valuable, but I think that there is an important observation that while, you know, getting into this field, if you want to be a CTI analyst, or let alone not just be junior CTI analyst, but be like, oh, I'm senior, or I have like some background here or whatever in standing to make points, then I expect to be able to give you the header of a PE file and tell me if something looks weird. Like, I'm sorry, that's kind of like a barrier to entry. However,
I can't do that, Joe.
I can
Just to
teach
be like
that,
totally
though.
honest, I can't.
That's fine, but that's easy to pick up, though. What's not easy to pick up, and to get back to Selena's point, is yes, if you can be a rock star reverse engineer, you could be able to do some sort of Rain Man, Beautiful Mind, whatever on an encoded protocol and pick it apart. But if you can't communicate that to anyone, I don't care, because you haven't done anything useful. So the soft skill aspect, or the core skill aspect, is far more difficult to teach. And while maybe it's unfortunate for people who have a difficulty with those skills sometimes, myself included, that's an area where honestly more work needs to be applied, because we can do the most brilliant technical work possible, but if that can't be transmitted or broken down into something that is actionable and understandable for other audiences, we might as well have not have done it at all, because it doesn't freaking matter at that point. So yeah, go ahead, Rick.
No, go ahead. I was going to say it ties into one of the questions that just popped in. So go ahead and finish that, and then I'll dovetail on top of it.
My
Joe.
finishing thought is that there are technical baselines that need to be met. There's no getting around that. We got to get there. But I'd like to think that those are far more teachable than some of the more built-in communicative skills that make this job meaningful at the end of the day.
So David kind of builds on this. The question from David is, what training can people take to improve their communication skills? So obviously one of the core competencies that we're talking about here, analytic writing and briefing, and two observations, or actually, I guess one for me, Toastmasters is one that you can get. You can go to Toastmasters website, you can find local things, you can present about anything you want. I could go and present about barbecue. In fact, I would probably recommend you present about a hobby that you have, because I feel like when you have high confidence in something, you present better in it. Also, for me, if I don't take myself too seriously, I present much better as well. So my practical recommendation is check out local Toastmasters, but I'm really curious to see what the other folks on the line have. Is like, how can we improve our writing skills? Selena actually has one that she mentioned, right? It was like, just blog. Just write. You want to improve your writing skills? Just write. But what do y'all have to say about improving these core competencies that are not necessarily technical ones?
My question is, what type of communication skills? Because there's communication in writing, then there's communication with body language, then there's also vocal communication. And like you said, Toastmasters, there's a ton of different CFPs that you can submit to and get experience that way. Another really great option, and hear me out, is sales, actually. Sales and consulting, like get anyone and try to sell them, it's not going to show up because I have try to sell them this bar, and be able to communicate that and just practice communicating and presenting information in a way that the person that you're engaging will actually be interested in listening to you. So those are my suggestions.
For things like empathy and teamwork and collaboration, I would recommend anything by Brene Brown, books, TED Talks, podcasts. I mean, that is, I read those. I mentioned my children, who are okay, by the way. I have 2 teenage girls. We read Brene Brown together, because getting into their head now, some of these skills and how to interact with other people and how to understand themselves and kind of deal with frustration and as well. So yeah, that'll be my plug for empathy, which I will say is probably the hardest to cultivate if it doesn't come naturally, but absolutely do it. I when someone says oh, I'm not a people person, or I don't like dealing with people, I can't handle people. It will always be hard, but you can still work towards it. Just like some people, things that aren't necessarily natural skills, but you can cultivate it and you can develop it. And with empathy in particular, it's absolutely critical that you make it a priority.
In terms of writing, there were a bunch of resources that I shared. But to Rick's point, I mean, the just like any skill, the only way that you're going to get better at it is by practicing it. And that could be anything from, blogging about things that interest you, to writing long form emails or letters to your family. Like, shout out to the USPS, write some letters and mail them. But if you just kind of like practice those skills, there's also so many books about writing well and sort of the writing process. And one of the things that I find that really, really helps me when I'm my husband sneezes so loudly. Can I just say that? He's not even in the same room as me and just exploded sneezed.
Quite a sneeze there.
Sorry about that. But so anyway, one of the things that helps me is by making fun of my husband and by writing prompt books. So there are some really, really awesome prompts like prompt type of books that you can get. Some of them are fiction. Like I like the fiction ones because it lets you be super creative, where it's like write about a time that you found a cat in a tree and a unicorn that was down the street, or some like weird stuff like that. There's also, I have a journal called, oh my gosh, it's something about your emotions, where it's just like this journal where you like journal about your emotions and doodle your emotions and write down, exercise your demons, like exercise, like working out, but exercise your demons, where it's like all of these writing prompts where you like re-examine how you interacted in a situation and how it could be maybe have been differently. So that is both, you know, to Rebecca's point about practicing those kind of like empathy or like those sort of emotional connections, as well as this like writing connection. So I found that super fun and interesting and valuable. But yeah, prompt writing is like is really great. I feel like it helps exercise that little muscle.
A couple just comments from the Q&A. Troy says Dale Carnegie material for public speaking, which I think that's a good one. Troy's got tech writing for business. Mike's got a good one about running for people that are working on their writing skills to use Microsoft Editor or Grammarly. Now, one thing I would say about Grammarly, if you're writing professionally for work and it's intelligence related, I probably wouldn't submit to a keylogger in the cloud. However, if it's something public facing, or if you're just practicing because you have a passion for something on a blog, I actually use Grammarly for the public facing stuff that I do. And I think that's really good. One other thing for me, because I used to write a lot when I was at Forrester, a whole lot more than I do, is just write. I find like part of at least for me, half my problem is just getting something on paper. And I get that writer's block. But once I start writing, even if it's absolutely terrible and I'm going to change it later, you at least get it out. And then you can start to refine it. But you can't get a finished product until you start. So I think just moving your hand, like I'm visual, I actually will start brainstorming on paper and kind of do some structured stuff there before I take it to a computer. So anybody else have anything on the core competencies?
Oh, I just wanted to mention finding a mentor. Like, if you don't have to find a mentor just in this space, if you want to try and develop some of these other skills, one of my favorite folks, and I think she was at the summit earlier, but she's in Amsterdam, but she does security communications for Nike, and she's a communications major. And when she and I first started working together, you know, she would want to pick my brain about CTI, but I would just want her to tell me how she made these amazing slides that told the CISO like everything they needed to know before he even asked a question. And so like finding mentors who do the job that you kind of wish you could develop those skills better at is another way to get more skilled.
Yeah, or I mean, at minimum, somebody you trust that can provide some positive feedback, right? Mentoring's tough. I think Katie mentioned, you know, that hey, I want you to be my mentor. Having that time and that dedication, as well as their dedication, is not always there. But having somebody you can trust that, hey, I'm gonna write this blog, and let me send over for some feedback. I may not agree with it, but it's a different perspective, right?
Sorry, I'm going through and reading.
Feedback is actually another skill people have to develop.
Oh, so I have to write a whole dissertation, which is like a lot. So I threw in my go-to resource in there. He offers a lot of advice on writing, and honestly, that's what I use. And guess how many times I have to write my dissertation? I did chapters 1 through 3, and now I have to do it a second time because I changed my topic. So that's a lot of writing. Yeah.
I was going to see if we could change gears on a topic that I thought, one of the things I've picked up from the conversations over the past 2 days, we have a lot of people that are new to the field because we're digital now. And so you may not have, their job may not be CTI and stuff like that. What about suggestions on how do you get in to CTI? Maybe you're a student, maybe you're in another role within a company, but does anybody have any suggestions there?
Yes, I wrote a blog post on this actually, and I'll post that in. But one example, and sorry if he's still listening, but an example from my team, my newest analyst, Aaron, I won't say his last name because he's probably gonna be embarrassed, but he was actually what we call a detection engineer at Red Canary, which are sort of, instead of SOC analysts, that's what we do. So I think like growing your career from sort of a SOC analyst, working in IT, system administrators. One of my teammates, Tony Lambert, who is like one of the smartest people ever, and I ask him questions all the time. He used to be a system administrator at a college. So sysadmin, oh my gosh, sysadmins who are really good, like they know everything about how networks work and they've seen all these weird things. And so I honestly feel like there are so many different paths into it. I've seen people come up through like the sysadmin IT side, then other people come over from sort of the like policy national security side, which is another great way to come over. But also want to acknowledge what Selena said, that if you're coming over from like a national security intelligence, traditional intel side, you're going to have to learn the technical stuff. And so I think it's sort of like we have two different paths, general paths, but honestly, there's no one path. You can come in any way you want, honestly.
So this is a good question because I'm actually talking to my brother right now. He's a machinist in a factory. So he's like on a factory floor at an aerospace engineering manufacturing company. He is like, blue collar worker through and through. And at Dragos, right, we focus on industrial cybersecurity. And I talked to him a lot about industrial cyber threat intelligence. And he is very, very interested in it, but has a background in more of, the plant side, which is, at Dragos, we try and talk to those types of people and sort of understand the value of threat intelligence. And so what I did was I put an entire, I obviously sent him a bunch of SANS videos, but put a lot of stuff together to see if he could, come up with his own sort of training plan for better understanding cybersecurity and potentially threat intelligence, and then be able to communicate that to his bosses and be like, this is something that I'm very interested in and would benefit our benefit us as a company. So I tried my best with him, but I'm very interested to hear what everyone else is thinking, because he comes from a very non-technical, struggle of a background to blue collar worker, but is very creative, very smart, has a mind of an analyst, I think, in a lot of ways. But he's trying to kind of figure out his place in his role too. And I think that we can teach ourselves a lot, frankly. There's so many free resources available. I mean, obviously paid resources, this is SANS, but there's a lot of opportunity to kind of get your foot in the door and kind of get started and watch YouTube videos, take free trainings and really and then of course meet people and network. I think that's super important too. So I'm gonna also take notes from what everyone else says and send it to him after this.
So that's a really good perspective, Selena, because I think one of the things, and you brought it up in your talk, and I know I emphasize this a lot, is there's a lot of CTI that's done for the sake of CTI, if that makes sense. That there's a lot of internal crawling up our own bungholes. Is that okay, Katie? Sort of analysis.
I'll allow it.
She'll allow it. Okay. Analysis that's really only designed for the CTI, threat intel, Twitter mafia, or whatnot. Whereas instead, we really need to think about who it is that we're trying to inform and who it is we're trying to support. I think Colin actually hit on this as well in his talk. And having a background in operations, having a background in business processes, having a background in what actually the organization does to produce value is critical. But having said that, like we've emphasized already, there is, you have to be at least this tall in order to enter the ride. You need to have a certain baseline of technical background to understand what's malware versus what's not, what's a C2 mechanism versus what's just some ad bullshit, or damn it, Katie, I'm sorry, some ad stuff going on out there. So one of the things I toss, even though this book is now a little bit outdated, but unfortunately there's not a really good successor, is okay, buy Practical Malware Analysis. It goes on sale every couple of months on Humble Bundle, and read the whole thing cover to cover. If you can do that and understand it, and then be able to figure out what it is the ops side of the business is doing, you're probably going to be in a good position, and honestly probably better off than a number of people that actually have jobs in this field, which is kind of sad. But just being able to have at least a minimum level of technical proficiency combined with understanding where CTI meets business priorities, strategic priorities, or operational priorities is where it matters.
Oh, you know what suggestions I give people? So I tell them to just start writing reports, like for instance, solar winds, right? Or maybe pick a less complicated one, because essentially we do a lot of writing and we do a lot of consuming of a lot of information and condensing it in a format that's digestible for people. So people come to me and they're like, okay, what can I do? First, I refer them to Katie Nichols' blog. Second, I tell them to read Internet Storm Center and like read over the actual posts, like the technical posts, and understand it. Option 3, write a report on it that makes sense to 3 different audience levels, whether that's, you know, operational, strategic, like executives, all of that. And then for the more technical folks, and then you build a body of work over time. I mean, geez, can you imagine if you go into a job interview and you have all of these reports on all of these, either SANS Internet Storm Center or whatever big, you know, InfoSec drama, Twitter, whatever that's going on, and you just go bam in the job interview, like I would be like, oh my gosh, we need to hire this person like today. So that's my suggestion. Just start doing what it is that you want to do. And then you can reference the actual public reports available, like what Joe does. Oh my gosh, if you've seen his blogs, like amazing. So
if I could state on there though too, for a lot of people that are getting started, you'll sometimes get turned down in a job application, go, oh, what did I do wrong? Or what do I need to put on the job application or so forth. And just do realize that most companies that hire, no matter how big or small they have, are really specific with what they're looking for at that time. And there's not just some giant cybersecurity or CTI skill set. And so just because you got turned down for a specific job, about what they were looking for in that position than what they might be looking for in the future. And to just kind of tease that out a little bit, if you're not tailoring your job application to the actual terminology and similar that's getting made, I don't mean to bypass the HR automated software. I mean to actually say, like, I've taken what you've said. I understand what you want me to have. I have done a self-assessment to say I feel pretty good about delivering on the skills you want. Like, that's what most people are looking for past HR when it gets to somebody on the team that's actually interviewing and wanting to hire for those folks.
I think that might be a good thread to dig into actually a little bit more, Rob, is
that's all I got.
A lot of us are, well, we can switch to others, right? You popped in.
Yeah, okay.
Is around, what do you look for in candidates or resumes? Because, hiring manager, tons of resumes. You have about 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds of my time when I screen an initial resume to see if I want to take another look at it. So I'm very curious, for those that are looking at resumes and recruiting, like how should people prepare the resumes? How should you try to make it be more effective so that you get a little bit further into the conversation?
Before I trounce on anything anyone else says, let me say my super mean opinion up front so that we can navigate it afterwards. And my super mean opinion about this is I see a lot of people give resume advice that are not involved in hiring at all. And it's really bad advice. So let me just state, number one, if that company has a technical recruiter, you should go talk to the technical recruiter. Most companies that put in the time and resources to have technical recruiters as part of their team, and just about everybody out there from Idaho National Labs to the latest startup has recruiters on their team, go get familiar with them, because even if they know that you're not ready for the job that's getting posted right now, they know what's coming down the pipeline. Second of all, just ask them. There's nothing wrong in an interview or in a resume process of, hey, here's what I've got, but I've got more skills that I'm not going to flood you with. But if you'd like to have a conversation, what are you looking for? Maybe your job application was a little bit confusing. There's so many people in the Fortune 500, especially, that get locked in to their HR system that they'd love to ask you more questions, but it won't be facilitated in that form. And a little bit extra there would be useful. And then the last thing, and then interested in everyone else's opinions, of course, is the last thing is just be realistic in your expectations. Feel free to apply if it's a senior position, apply anyways. That's always fine. But the real answer is, like, it's hard to do entry-level jobs in this field. Most people don't want to hire entry-level InfoSec professionals. And then when you get specialized like incident response or CTI, they sure as hell don't want to hire entry-level positions. And so we can all say, oh, there's a big skill gap and we want all these people all day long. Sometimes the best places to start are a little bit smaller. Go to places that are fantastic places, like whether it's government, DHS, your local utility, your local bank, whatever else. Like, those are folks that are a good gateway into the community as well.
I'll throw stuff out there then, because I've been dealing with this.
So sorry, Ryan, can I jump in?
Always, Katie.
We have a very
Always.
special guest, literally coming to you from behind this wall. Hey, sweetie, how's your day? This is my husband, Drew. He works at the Department of Energy. He is a traditional kind of Intel person, and he's actually why I got into this field to begin with, because he was like, you might like Intel. But anyways, I invited him because he is a distinguished Toastmaster. So Drew, we're talking about like career things, and we were talking about core skills and how people can get better at speaking and writing. Could you give like 30 seconds of like why Toastmasters is good and why you spent your time and why you're a good speaker now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for letting me join in the call. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. So I just wanted to briefly mention a little bit about Toastmasters. First of all, they're all over the country. There's probably one right nearby you. Toastmasters.org is where you want to go. And basically, it's a member organized club in which, yeah, this is proof that's not kidding here. Member organized club where you practice running a meeting, speaking organized, prepared speeches, speaking impromptu speeches, and evaluating each other. So basically, it allows you to prepare for those elevator type speeches when you're having with senior leaders, and it allows you to take charge of meetings. So basically, if you haven't given a lot of speeches in high school or college, this is the time to do it. This is the time to practice it. And it really puts you ahead of the competition in terms of speaking without warning, just like as I'm doing today, and really helps in terms of job interviews and things like that. So I highly recommend it. Again, toastmasters.org, plug in your zip code. You can find a location near you. If there isn't one near you, you can start one on your own. It's really just that easy. I've been doing it since 2013, 2014. It's helped me with my job a lot. It helped me get the job that I have now. It helped me be an Intel briefer for the Secretary of Energy for 2 of them in a row. And so again, I highly recommend it. It's usually something that people do not like to practice at all. It's in the top 10 things that people are afraid of. People would rather jump out of a plane and parachute out than to give a public speech. So take this challenge on and it'll put you way ahead of your competitors. I guarantee you that. And again, you can reach out to me anytime if you want, if you have any questions.
I'll post his LinkedIn in chat. So thanks, sweetie. And if you want some Prosecco, I probably should not drink this whole bottle. So, all right, who was talking? Ryan.
Bad assessment, Katie.
Yeah. That was incredible, Drew. I think it's been a couple of years since we last met, and I think it was over margaritas downtown. So always the DC connection.
That's right. But what year? Because with COVID, I don't know what year it is
anymore. Basically, 2004 through or 2008 through about 2012. The whole margarita time frame in my life is a little mushy.
Yes. Yes, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Gallery Place, right? Very good.
Oyamel. There we go. Oyamel in DC, great place.
Like
what I was going to add to Robert, I agree to everything Rob said about the interviewing and bad advice from people. So I'll give some bad advice of my own here. I've seen a lot of resumes come in. Occasionally I get 9-page resumes. To Rick's point of view, that is terrifying unless you have an academic career. So like Zena going through her PhD, if you have a list of publications that you're adding in, but it's about knowing your audience, to Rob's point, like what are you applying for, and customizing your resume or your CV to be appropriate. Obviously in EU, we'll use the word CV, but academics, my wife is a PhD, so I'm very familiar with academic careers and resumes, CVs. Like those will be 30 pages long, depending on the age of the person, because they have to show their entire body of work. When I get a resume that's more than 2 pages long, it usually means they haven't customized it for the role they're putting in for, or it's stuff I'm not going to get to, or things that are kind of out of date that aren't necessarily on there. So that's my hot take on bad advice. When I have 10 seconds to look and put things in a pile, I'm probably not going to get to 1987 or even worse, like 2014, frankly. So get your bottom line up front. What do you do? What value can you provide? That's the biggest one I've seen.
Yeah, and to pivot off what Brian said, I don't necessarily want to know what you've done. I want to know what you can do for me. How can you help my team? How can you help what I'm doing, in the long run? That some of what you've done may, raise questions that I'm going to ask about, but if you can, in your resume, bring out those things that you want to bring valuable to my team, to the hiring manager, you're going to be a step ahead.
Cool. What other questions we got?
We've got a couple questions about both burnout and work hours. What hours can you expect to work in CTI?
Hey, Joe, what do you think about burnout?
And do you know what that word means?
Nobody should emulate how hard you work, but for those mere mortals that can try, any tips there?
So I have a tough time on this, and I'll give Rob I was about to say an S-ton of credit on this subject, that Rob has looked out for me when we were working together. Well, I was working for him, we're not working together.
Didn't work for me. You work for Sergio. We just
did he drop off? He dropped off.
Good
so
riddance, diamond model.
But anyway, between Sergio and Rob, that they really tried to set out boundaries for like, hey, Joe, you don't need to do all this. But it's hard because honestly, this job is a lot of freaking fun. I really enjoy this on a visceral, sort of very personal level. It fills my bucket, to use some terminology. So it's really hard to step away. But at the same time, and maybe this is why I've never worked in a single role for more than like 3 or 4 years. But it's possible to just get to a point where it's like, oh, I can't do this anymore, or it's just I go to the well and the well is dry. And I know we had a discussion earlier, just to rope in a previous conversation, about bringing in additional perspectives to try to sharpen or improve our own insight into how things are looking. It might also be the case, if depending on what kind of an analyst and what kind of a person you are, if you're not a 9 to 5 sort of type, but you're a 6 to 2200 and I'm going to dream about this as well, that it might be necessary to also think about like, okay, I can do this for X amount of time, but then what do I do from there? Because I need to recharge or I need to change perspectives on things. So burnout is definitely real. I highly recommend that people don't get there. How to avoid that is kind of up to you. CTI answer, it depends. But one of the main things is that if you find yourself in a position where things start being routine or mundane, then it's time to start questioning what you're doing, whether that means a different perspective where you are or trying to figure out a different way to approach the same problem, because you're not going to be a good analyst then. And I know that's not where I was about 6 months ago. So that's all I got.
It's a good perspective. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to add on the burnout topic, because I've seen it enough times now. I mean, anybody leading teams in a global pandemic where everyone's remote, you're going to start looking for signs, and you better be looking for signs, because people are burning out. I burn out every now and then. It's totally fine. But recognize it's not just about how much you work. To Joe's comment, when he was satisfied, he was working a lot and it worked for him. And it might have even helped prevent some burnout. But if you are working things you don't like or don't find passion in, or you don't feel your work is producing to where you think it should be helping the customer or whoever else you're serving for, like that's when burnout can exist as well. It's not just I worked 15 hours a day. I've seen old people burn out in 3 hours a day, but they were doing non-fulfilling work and they weren't just sort of running against the wall. And the last comment I'll have on the 3 to 4 year thing, there's nothing wrong with moving around every 3 to 4 years. That's fantastic, actually. Get the experience, go share that experience. What I do want to comment on, and I saw some like Twitter flame thread about how this was an inappropriate comment, and I don't care. It's true. If you are moving around every 12 to 18 months, it does not look good on your resume. Now, I'm not saying don't leave if you're unhappy. I'm not saying it's a killer on the resume. But if I look back and I see the last 4 jobs were 12 to 16 months, as an analyst, I'm saying they're probably only coming here for about 12 to 16 months. And it does take you to the bottom of the pack. There's always good reasons for it. We got to be careful of biases and balance with work and life and everything else. But it is a consideration. It's okay once or twice. If it's every job, you got to ask yourself the questions as well.
Yeah, Rob, I would just +1 that. Like, that's something that I would ask about in an interview. And I actually had a situation where like last year, a year before, I asked someone and they were like, wow, I get that question a lot. So yeah, if I see a year, I'm going to ask. Sometimes there are good reasons, like government contractors, like you're going to move around, or like family, or there are a lot of good reasons. But yeah, I would agree, Rob. That's something that I would at least ask about in an interview, not automatically disqualifying, but something to think about.
I agree with you, but to note for the wide audience too, by the time you're getting a Katie to read your resume and think about asking you, you've won. For 90% out of you, you will get disqualified by HR, and you'll never get to answer that question.
What I was going to add in here, Rob kind of mentioned a little bit, work-life balance. My wife is a therapist. And so I get, she's got a master's degree in therapy. And one of the things she always talks about is boundaries. And having boundaries is really, really important. And I know it's hard to say, oh, you need to have work-life balance and things along those lines. But carving out space for yourself to do things, carving out time to recharge. Now, there's only so much you can control, because you look at your project list, or I look at my team's project list, it's huge. We'll call them fake days off. There's things that we do in my org that don't go up through the broader hierarchy of my organization because people need time off. Or if someone's working on a project or incident response or whatever the case may be, like I try to do that. It's tough because they're like needs of the business. But I do think, trying to identify when you're getting burned out. And if you've reached the spot where it's over, start looking for a new gig, because it might take, it could take a year to get a new job, depending on what your skill set, who are, but no one's going to look out for you but you. Now, you might have the boss, he or she might do that. And I like to try to think that, but really you've got to have some boundaries. And when enough is enough, start plotting your exit strategy so that you can move on to something else. Now, I know mortgages, tuition, that's not always a black and white thing. It's very gray, but your work is going to definitely go across and take advantage of you, generally speaking. So you got to have some personal boundaries to try to recharge. Otherwise, you're not going to be effective in your jobs, and that's not good for your work. That's not good for me as a leader in my organization to have people that can't work effectively.
So to jump in, because I think there were a couple questions about burnout and hours. And so for those of you who are thinking about getting into CTI or incident response or anything of this nature, it is not typically a 9-to-5 job. Like, there will be emergencies, there will be incidents, there will be times when you are expected to, or you just need to work after hours or weird hours, whether it's your choice or not. But it is not always that set schedule. And so it's almost, Rick, what you talked about were boundaries. We call them our non-negotiables. And this is something I talk about with my team or the people I work with ahead of time, which are, especially if we're working an incident, I need half an hour to work out a day. And I have to get that done, or I'm going to be a miserable person. I have a 2-year-old. From 7 to 8, we do bath and story time. So I don't care if we are in the middle of an incident. You can lose me for that hour. Do not schedule turnover meetings between 7 and 8 p.m. my time zone. And I'm upfront with people about that. And that means when something comes up, I can still get those things that kind of fill me up and don't burn me out. And it also sets a really good precedent, I found. Like I said, do this ahead of time. Don't be in the middle of an incident and be like, oh, yeah, I'm busy now, because that is always hard. But if everyone on the team can say, these are the things that are important to me, and these are my boundaries, you can build that into even a high op tempo job to kind of just maybe stretch that burnout time a little bit more. But yeah, to piggyback off you, Joe, as well, I know that I'm going to need a week off probably every 3 months as well, just because of that cadence. You can sometimes you learn what fulfills you, whether it's a little bit each day or a big chunk once in a while. You can identify these things and work within these sometimes crazy schedules.
That's partly knowing thyself, right? One of the things I learned later on in my career, took me a long time to learn, was I don't do good thinking good in the morning. So all of my meetings are scheduled basically when I have to do the least amount of thinking. And then if I actually have stuff I have to work on, it tends to actually be more like 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, because for me, that's the best time for me to do actual critical thinking. So I'm lucky enough in my current role where I can do things like stop working at 3 maybe, and then start working again at 7. But that's very obviously job dependent and not what I was able to do when I was an IR and SOC analyst, right? But it's setting up your own boundaries and knowing how your own brain and your body works for kind of going through all that. And then on the other sides, I had a boss once who never did any meetings after 8 or before 8 in the morning and after 5 p.m. But unlike me, his concentration through the day was absolute. This guy put in 6 or 7 hours of work that was basically my equivalent of a 13-hour workday, because I'm I'm all over the place. I'm looking at Twitter, I'm reading Reddit, I'm reading the newest Thomas Rid book, all sorts of stuff. And he was just like task after task after task. But after 5 p.m., it was like the whistle blew and he slid down the brontosaurus tail and didn't have a phone because he lived in a rock house with a Bam Bam child. So figure out your own world.
One of the things I think too that helps, at least for me, is because I am very hyper focused. Like I'm a very type A personality. And so I want to be very like, I'm a perfectionist with my work. And so I'll push myself really hard. But I found that finding other things that I can set goals to do that are not work related is super, super valuable. So especially in coronavirus, I've taken up ultra running, which is like a thing that my husband and I do together because he's also a total workaholic. So like, okay, I'm setting a goal to like run this amount of miles, or like I'm going to run a 50K by this time. And then so having like, also to be fair, we're very privileged. Like we're like two young people that don't have kids and like, you know, no college to pay for or whatever. But like recognizing that, okay, like this is a goal that I'm setting outside of my work life to make time to achieve, I think can be really helpful.
One thing, just to interject, because I know this has been a long conversation, that I want to emphasize for people who are listening, though, there's also a distinction between, is this your job or is this your life? So there is the perspective of like, hey, I want to do CTI and I want to go speak in public conferences. I want to present on panels. I want to have blog posts and I want to like, you know, have 10,000 Twitter followers or whatever. It's like, yeah, you're not talking about a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job then. You're talking about really investing, like that's your life at that point. If you'd rather have a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 while working in CTI, you can do that, but you're probably not going to have, at least not regularly, these other opportunities. So it's really just a question of what do you value, what are you looking for, and what kind of existence do you want to live within this space? And it's perfectly reasonable. And this isn't to say it's a bad thing at all. It's probably a good thing because you're probably a better father than I am, and among other things. But that you can separate yourself from work. But it also means that it's harder to do other items as well. So it's really a question about what is it that you value? What is it that you want to achieve in this space? And like, not to put it really kind of blank, you know, out there, but like, what are you willing to sacrifice in order to make that crap happen?
So
Crap is okay.
I push back a little bit because for years I worked 8-hour days and like my husband's on Zoom, so I can't lie to you right now. When I was supporting government. So that's an example of like when you're in government and you're working with sensitive information, like you work when you're there. And so for years I was working 40-ish hour weeks. Commute sucked into DC because that's life. But I was working 40-ish hour weeks and I was valued. That said, like, now I work a little more, but I don't work crazy hours. I am on Twitter. And again, I can't lie because my husband's here. I am on Twitter at night, like checking for things or looking at Slack, but like I relax on weekends. I watch TV, I sleep in, I like to sleep. So I don't know. I think it's a balance. Like you don't have to work crazy hours to be successful. I don't think.
No, you don't have to work crazy hours to be successful, but it depends on the kind of success. Because to push back on that a little bit, Katie, like you and Adam and the rest of the attack team, you guys were on the road an awful lot, even while you were in government, whether it's to present, to represent, or otherwise at a conference or something along those lines. And that is a sacrifice, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's kind of fun. Traveling's kind of fun, but it's also a dislocation. So, you know, again, it just depends on what it is that you want, what it is that you're willing to deal with, from whether it's an inconvenience or a legitimate, I have to give something up, whether it's spending time with your kids, spending time with your spouse or partner, or just being away from whatever you call home and playing video games or whatnot, and finding out what's the right balance. Yeah.
If I could jump in, because I see Rob and Zena want to talk. One quick thing that this is from like a women's leadership conference a few years ago. If you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And that was something that I always try to keep in mind. Like if I say yes to this speaking engagement, am I saying no to workout time, time with my husband, time relaxing, time teaching, time doing something else? So that's just one thing I wanted to throw out. If you're saying yes to something, be cognizant of what you're saying no to.
Yeah, I just want to, I'll agree with both of you, but I'll kind of talk more to Joe's stance here of, you had to define what success is for you. And there is nothing wrong about having a good work-life balance where you literally put in 8 hours a day and you go home, you spend time with your family or alone playing Xbox for all I care. Like whatever you're doing, if that's success for you, not a person in this world can critique that. That being said, I get people that come up to me and all my students and everything else. Oh, Rob, you're smart. No, I'm not. Like anybody that knows me knows I'm not, but I work really hard and I work insane hours. And when I was getting started at SANS, I had to teach 28 times a year, 28 weeks out of the year that I was traveling, teaching SANS classes out there. And then people were like, oh yeah, a lot of people know Rob, no shit. I've been in every state that you're around. And yes, Jennifer, I cussed. You can get mad later. But anyways, I'm not saying that there's no other way to do it, but I do think it is perfectly fair that if you're talking about, oh, I want to go redefine this, or I want to go start a company, or I want to go do any one of those kind of topics, you're going to have to trade off something, and hopefully you enjoy it.
Okay, my turn. So I was gonna say that, I have a lot on my plate too, and sometimes I hit the wall. And how I can tell I hit the wall is that stuff that I liked previously, I try to find ways that I hate it. So like, for instance, some of the classes that I'm in, I'm like, oh, hell no, I don't want to do that. I want to quit school. Like, I can't stand this crap. And I'm like, oh, I think I'm a little overwhelmed right now. So what I do is I take a step back. I look at things that I can control, like, with all the stuff going on in life, like what do I have control over? What actions do I have control over? And then I look at ways to say no to stuff and get stuff off my plate. And I guess you could say I delegate. And then after that, what I do is I try to find ways to cultivate my curiosity, my sense of fun, and my sense of playfulness, if that makes sense. So like sometimes I'll just put on music and start dancing and not do anything related to all of the stacked stuff that I have. And it engages like a different part of my brain, and it helps bring that part of myself back online, the part that has the passion, that isn't like, all of this stuff sucks and I hate it, So like I just have to be mindful when I feel like I'm hitting that wall, that burnout wall, if that makes sense, and then take a step back and re-energize or reconnect with that part of myself that actually likes stuff. So that's what I do.
Awesome.
I made this point in Slack, but I also just want to kind of address the elephant in the room, and that women tend to have a much more difficult work-life balance situation than men do, for a lot of various reasons. And so I think that like, for instance, as managers or as team members or whatever, like educate yourselves on, for instance, the pay gap, the childcare imbalances, certainly, especially in the United States, childcare costs. Think about, when women have to choose between having kids or giving up their career because things are so expensive and unattainable. And I'd also, point out here too that, all of us on this video anyways, and I'm, making an assessment here, we're all white people, and that people of color and people from other diverse backgrounds, people with disabilities, you're Hispanic. Okay, so not everyone. Sorry, Zena. Okay. But the majority of people on this call have that privilege. And so being able to sort of like recognize that privilege and know that, people of color, people from diverse backgrounds tend to have to potentially work more and work harder and have a more difficult time with work-life balance. So I think obviously I'm saying that from very much a place of privilege, and I don't have all the answers there, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that in this discussion.
Absolutely. And so I love continuing education, and I just want to make a pitch. Stanford's continuing education classes are amazing. And I just finished one, which was on motherhood and career. It was a 6-week course once a week. And yeah, even that, taking that class was difficult because I have 4 children who I like to spend time with. But I made it a priority because I realized if I, again, privileged You know, I have a lot of flexibility, like with bringing in help, and I have family who live nearby to help out with the kids. But if I struggle with it, I can't imagine how hard it is for people who don't have that same support system and resources. And it gave me some really good ideas as a leader and a manager to kind of help with work-life balance and setting a good example. And even just like what you're doing, which is amazing, which is let's talk about it. Because when people don't talk about it, it makes it seem shameful. Like I'm struggling, regardless of whether it's because you're a parent or a woman or your spouse has been laid off or you're just tired. When people don't talk about the things that are hard, it makes it even harder. So I love the fact that we get to address these things. And I wanted to pivot if we're okay, because we got a couple questions I've seen throughout the day that I think is something we actually don't talk about, which is, can you age out of CTI? We're all relatively young, except for Rick. And so this isn't something I think we talk about, just kidding, because he's older than me, because we just had our birthdays. But is that something, is there ageism in our industry? And if so, how can we counteract that?
Yeah, I'll note it's probably not experiencing aging out yet, because I don't know that we've had dedicated CTI fields for long enough to have folks age out. Exclusionary, I'm sure there's being some companies that are being jackasses about some aspect of prejudice, ageism, sexism, multiple, all, you know, there's some companies hitting all the bells there. Rebecca, you're right. Oh, third cuss word. Okay. Come on, Jennifer. All right. It's happy hour after hours at a 2-day SANS conference.
It's for a good cause, Rob.
I was a gem. I was a gem on the vendor day. All right. So look, on the discussion of like, are there companies being exclusive and being prejudiced? Yeah, for sure, about any topic we could pick. But to your point, you know, I think a lot about folks that I respect, Katie and others, not Katie Nichols. I also respect you, Katie Nichols, but Katie always doing the Microsoft bug bounties and everything she's done at Luda Security. She's just been fantastic.
Katie Mosaurus, Katie M with the pink hair who kicks ass.
Yes, but I don't even ever try with her last name. She and I like ribbing each other over how basic.
Oh, you should have heard me try to do a Greek last name today. I know Andreas is probably asleep today, but
yeah, no thanks. It's something about being from Alabama that just I set myself right up of good to know English. Let's leave it at that. But on that topic of ageism, she talks about this a lot, where she sees a lot of other people benefiting now in a way that she never got access to and is now blocked out of because she's too old for it or so forth. But what I would say explicitly of CTI, and I'll leave it at this, is I don't think, again, we have the opportunity to see some of these prejudices, which might make us feel like we're beyond them, but recognize that some of them come a little bit later in a community's development. And we haven't been a community very long in public practice. So we're not past some of those issues. And the second thing I would say on the hiring, I find it is weird that there's not more focus on individual contributor career paths, that you don't have to worry about, oh, you're 45 or 50 and you haven't been a manager at some point. What's wrong with you? And so it's less about necessarily the age so much as the years of experience that lead into that position. And I do think we have a systemic issue in the community of you should promote up for more pay to get to manager versus let's have independent career tracks, which we actually did very well at the NSA with technical directors and kind of civilians.
I was actually just thinking of this subject today. After my talk, and in the perspective, so I'm 40-ish, and that's what I'll leave it as.
Your high school again, Joe?
What's that?
What's your high school again?
Yeah, it's all good. But, you know, from the perspective, it's like, okay, like, you know, I'm doing pretty well, but, you know, I remember like my dad worked as a Chicago police officer until he was 60. And you know, he managed to do that fairly well, did it for 35 years. And it's like, wow, can I do CTI for that long? Am I going to be in this industry until I'm 60, 70, 80? Because who knows what retirement and life expectancy is going to look like? And how is that going to look? So from a hiring input perspective, I honestly have no idea. I think it's shameful if we have a certain degree of ageism, because there are people who are brilliant analysts that are still sharp as, I was going to say something and then Katie was going to like yell at me, very sharp, that we should be bringing into this field. But I also wonder, what is the future for those of us who have been doing this for so long and would kind of like to do it continuously, because this isn't necessarily the company town or part of a union, and you retire at 55 or whatever and then draw a pension. Like, how does that look? And we don't know yet because it's a young field, like Rob was saying. But it's going to be really interesting, and honestly, it kind of scues the shit out of me.
Damn it! I just want to note that. Oh yeah, there you go. But I just want to note. I feel like it's Mark Cuban, and he was like, "Oh, if you drop the F-bomb, you get fined $15,000." And I'm like, "But it's for charity," and so he dropped it again. Like, I feel like I'm about to start screwing with Jennifer here. But what I was going to do as a quick note was say that when we look at kind of the career tracks again, I'll go back to this and kind of staying in a CTI profession. It is important to find out what that is. Because your CTI role could be so different. But just Joe's point in general, I do find it, again, I'll say concerning that we're having these discussions at all. And without, getting esoteric about it, these are the like in-person drunk conversations we have every year after CTI. But I would just give one last thought to what would you do at your organizations on this topic around that prejudice piece, knowing that as CTI analysts, one of the main things we should be, really adapt with is some level of understanding of biases and what that does to any given organization. So I'll just go back because I keep thinking about this, Joe. I thought you just elicited a really good conversation there of what are they in our community. I'd love to see a CTI talk next year along that kind of topic.
And so the feedback in the Slack room is probably, again, it's about our biases. We might not see it, but there's absolutely ageism in our community. And so I think that's something that it's really good for all of us to be aware of, whether we're hiring or whether it's people on our teams or people we work with, but that this is something people are experiencing. So that is kind of eye-opening for me.
One practical thing I think you could do is you push your either inside or outside recruiters to say you want diverse candidates. Doesn't matter, creed, color, age, whatever. It's like, I remember it was 3 years ago, we took our picture on stage and me and Kovar and like, wow, there's a lot of 30, 40 something beards up on this stage, but push the hiring practices to make sure that you have diverse candidates, because as Intel professionals, that diversity is how we succeed, or lack of it leads us to failure.
I think that's kind of a good note to start to wrap up, because we are almost at 6 p.m. Eastern and I probably need to go find my husband and get dinner. I think that there have been some themes throughout this summit.
The box is down. I see him.
What's that, Becca? He doesn't look too hungry. But I was just going to say that in terms of, thinking about our cognitive biases, about how we need different perspectives in this field, like I feel like that's been a theme through the summit and through anything Intel related. So I'm honestly so grateful that we've kind of gotten to these issues and like people are opening up in the Slack channel on like ageism. These are things that I think our community is going to grapple with, but I think a great start is that we're talking about them here. And I think we all acknowledge cognitive biases are a thing and we need to hedge against them. And that makes us all of our CTI teams better. So I don't know, Becca, Rick, any last thoughts before we leave for real? I think Rob's like ready to go.
No, thank you all. This has been fantastic. I feel like we already did the summit sign off once and was like, gotta do it again. But this has been fantastic. This has been a fantastic 2 days. And I was telling somebody else after you added my birthday that honestly, like there is no way I would actually rather spend it than with you guys. And it was really hard thinking that we aren't going to all see each other in person. But this has been fantastic, and the community and the connections and all the new
really
people.
About me, Rebecca. I know it's just me that you want to hang out with. It's okay. All right, I'll be out to the West Coast sometime soon. We'll geek out with flaxseed and and author updates.
Go visit some wastewater treatment plants. It's going to be awesome.
Right. There's a great example of a female role model. Your engineer, the mom. Yeah, perfect. So I just want to say quickly, the ICS Summit is coming up in like 2 months. Feel free to sign up online for the SANS ICS Summit. The co-chair is a pretty sweet dude. His name's Tim Conway. The other guy is me, but you can deal with it. And thank you all again for coming. For those of you that are in my class Monday morning, remember you've got a Slack link. And so your Slack link is already set up so you can go into the channel for your class. Some of you are asking like, hey, my books haven't arrived because of Brexit and everything else or whatever you're dealing with in life. All of the stuff is digital now. Digital ISO, digital workbooks, digital books. So even if your kit hasn't arrived, you're fine for class Monday morning. It is 6 days. Originally was advertised out as 5, updated to 6 in between. So do mark off next Saturday. Wow, you're so lucky to get to hang out with me on a Saturday. But so yeah, anyways, make sure that if you have any questions, hit up the portal folks before Monday morning if you can. I'll see you in class. Katie, Rick, anything else?
No, nothing for me. Gratitude. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Stay safe. See you later.